Thanks for coming, everybody. My name is Jay Jasinski. I'm executive producer of Great Lakes TV, and we have something very special for everybody tonight. We're starting a new series. Ted brought up this great idea that a lot of people are bringing their beer tasting, their wine tasting virtually now because of the circumstances. So we thought, well, we should do that too and shine a light on some good Michigan breweries and vineyards and distilleries, and also have some laughs and learn a little bit about Michigan through some very wacky stories that Kyle and I dig up. So for everybody watching at home, we want you to participate. So in future episodes, we'll let people know what beers we're going to be tasting beforehand, so you can get a hold of them, support some local breweries, and join along. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. So I'm going to hand over to Kyle, who's going to tell us a little bit about how this is going to work, and also introduce a very special guest.
Thank you, Jay. Very kind intro. Like Jay said, we're going to be telling a story from a different period in Michigan history, and we're going to break that down into 3 acts. And as that happens, our good friend Jim here is going to share with us 3 separate beers from this week. We're working with Odd Side Ales. So let me introduce Jim. And Jim, what are we drinking today? What's coming up first?
All right, so we are going to kick things off with their Flickr Blonde. This is one of their core products. It was not one of the first beers that they came to the market with, but it is one that came pretty early on and really found a strong following. Oddside was started back in 2010 on St. Patty's Day, and actually all of the guys that started the brewery graduated from Michigan State, so go green. But this Flickr Blonde, I'm a huge fan of. It's kind of neat because most coffee beers that people are familiar with are usually stouts or brown ales, and those are all delicious. But I really like the idea of the blonde ale with coffee because it's a little unique and easy to drink. So not everybody likes stouts. The blonde ale works for a lot of people, and the coffee's just a fun little spin on that.
Definitely smells like coffee.
It definitely smells like coffee.
Let's try it out.
Yeah, cheers.
Whoa, I like it. I can really taste the vanilla.
Yeah, I think they did a really nice job with this. It's well balanced. It goes down easy. The coffee's there, but it's not overpowering anything. It's all pretty harmonious.
I feel like a lot of blonde ales, they usually go well with having a flavor added to them. Is that?
Yeah. It's kind of like vanilla ice cream. It's a good thing on its own, but it's kind of a blank canvas. You can go in a million different directions with it, and a lot of the flavors that they add to blonde ales really just work well because it is a blank canvas.
Dan, what do you think about this beer?
I like it. I mean, I'm not very picky when it comes to beers, but I do like it.
Jay, I'm interested in hearing a little bit about James Jesse Strang, the Mormon king of Beaver Island. Do you know anything about him?
I do. I'm not an expert, which is why I have a little bit of help today. I got this book called Michigan, which is very helpful when you know about Michigan stories.
And what's it about?
Ohio. But yeah, so our story tonight is going to be called The King of Beaver Island, which, if that doesn't rope you in, I don't know what will.
He was lost on Lake Michigan where the stormy winds blow.
I was going to get a little bit into the backstory of this guy.
Yeah.
Basically, he, as a young kid, thought that he was called to a life of significance, and he had every intention of marrying the Queen of England. And he planned to be the next Julius Caesar or Napoleon.
He sounds like he'd be a real fun kid to have. I feel like
good guy to pal around the schoolyard with. Hey, you want to play basketball or baseball? No, I should really focus on marrying the Queen. So he actually was raised Baptist. He started to learn about Mormonism, and then he just forgot all about his ministry and then joined the Church of Latter-day Saints. And he really hit it off with, this was back in 1844. So he hit it off with Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism and its lead prophet. Unfortunately, within 3 months of him joining, Joseph Smith was murdered. James Jesse Strang had only been in the church for 3 months. But he somehow came to the church, and he had a letter that was written from Joseph Smith, or he claimed it was from Joseph Smith, appointing him, James Jesse Strang, as the leader of the church, even though he had only been there for 3 months. And he said he also had a divine ordination. He said that angels came to him and said, you should be the new leader of the Mormon church. So this kind of split everyone. Some people believed him, some people didn't. Half the group followed Brigham Young to Utah, and then half the people followed James Jesse Strang. So he made his way to Beaver Island. And the main difference between the two groups, Brigham Young believed in polygamy. He had 55 wives and 59 kids with those 55 wives. Not 59 kids each, but 59 kids total. And King Strang was all about monogamy. And then he gets to Beaver Island, and then everything changes because he met 19-year-old Elvira Field, and they fell madly in love. But the church doctrine deemed it inappropriate for a young, unwed girl to travel with a religious gentleman, is the exact quote. So he thought of a great idea. He said, well, how about I just dress you up like a boy, and everyone will think you're my nephew, Charlie Douglas.
The old Charlie Douglas trick.
Yeah.
We've all done it.
It's, you know,
Classic maneuver.
sometimes you got to hide your girlfriend as your young nephew, Charlie Douglas. And it worked for a while. He used to like travel the Great Lakes region proselytizing, and then someone got wise to it and said, that I don't think that's your nephew at all. I think that's a woman. I think that's Elvira Field. So instead of just admitting to this and admitting his fault, he then said, oh, God came to me again and actually said polygamy was the way to go the whole time. And then half of his followers were like, okay. And then half his followers were like, that's kind of why we followed you here, because we thought you were all about monogamy and we trusted you. But I don't know, I guess God speaks to you, so great. He married Elvira Field, which is now his second wife. His first wife, understandably, wasn't happy, so she moved back to Wisconsin. And then he just started marrying girls, having kids. He decided everyone, because he had a larger population and because he was in charge of that population, that he should therefore be in charge of everyone on the island.
So this is where they start getting a little cavalier. They're like, all right, this is our Mormon kingdom, which was frowned upon by the people on the island that weren't Mormons. On July 8th, 1850, when the reorganization was completed, Strang took it one step further and he crowned himself in a pageant of great pomp and ceremony. He declared himself king. So that didn't really fly too well with the people on the island either. So here we have this guy who not only does he declare this Beaver Island his kingdom, now he's saying that he's king. And I also read that he actually cut himself a nice little cardboard crown to wear during the ceremony. So things were getting weird on Beaver Island. The rule of King Strang was supreme and absolute, his authority being both temporal and spiritual. The use of tea, tobacco, and liquor was forbidden. So now the people who lived on the island really didn't like him. His followers were required to pay a tithe, I don't know if I'm saying that right, a tithe of all they earned, produced or received. This money was expended for improvements, blah, 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 so they took care of people with this money. But he also made sure that the people on the island that weren't the Mormons also had to pay this tax. And so they said, no, we're not going to pay that. You're not an actual king. You're wearing a cardboard crown. And he said, flog them. And he took them into the forest. He flogged them all down. So to conclude part one, so we got a new king on Beaver Island. He's making everybody pay tithes. Does anyone know how to say a word? A tithe. And he's flogging them down if they don't.
Jay, do you know what year this started?
Yes, 1847.
Wow.
Yeah.
We have cardboard. We could be a king of something here.
That's all it takes.
So this guy was like a decade too late, because if he was just like a little earlier, he probably would have had some like weird legitimacy there. And then suddenly we'd have like a cardboard crown wearing king and his polygamous descendants.
Yeah.
I was a little surprised they had cardboard back then.
That's what it said. I was kind of thinking that too. I was like, wait, what's in calico?
I read that it was made of tin.
I read.
Well, cardboard is more fun because I'm picturing a Burger King crown.
It was it was an Amazon Prime box that he fashioned into.
I mean, how else do you get stuff to the island, right?
Yeah.
Jim, what do we got next?
All right, next we'll dive into the Citra Pale Ale.
Jay, while everybody's grabbing their beers, I did use Internet Assistant to look up the pronunciation of that word for you. So let's see if we can.
Tithe.
That's what I said. I think. No.
Tithe.
Tithe is like a tax, isn't it?
Yeah.
Tithe, yeah.
Tithe.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, they'd pay a tithe on anything that they made, and then if they didn't, they got flogged.
Yeah, so outside Citra Pale Ale, it is a pale ale, first and foremost, hopped exclusively with Citra hops, which are usually very tropical, juicy. You get some really fun flavors out of this hop. The brewing process is kind of a fun little science. When you add hops very early in the brewing process, you extract all of the bitterness out of the hops, and if you add them very late in the brewing process, you extract all the flavor and none of the bitterness. And what they've done here is they really just kind of dump all these hops in right at the end so that you get a ton of flavor and not nearly as much bitterness as you might expect with all the aromas that are coming out of the glass. And that's why I love this so much. You get a ton of flavor and it's not super bitter, so you can drink like 5 or 6 of them if you really need to.
I do. And
So when someone's saying something super hoppy, does that mean, are they referring to the process when the hops are added early or late in a?
That is super subjective, just like adding hops to the beer. To me, when I say something is super hoppy, I'm usually referring to bitterness, but like this, and there are even some wines, they say there's something called perceived sweetness, and to me this is perceived hoppiness. There are a ton of hops in this beer and there's a ton of flavor and aroma, but you don't get a ton of bitterness. So to say it's really hoppy, I would say is pretty accurate, even though it's not super bitter. But you could make the same argument for the next beer that we're going to try, where the focus is more on the bitterness. So it's kind of subjective, but usually for most conversations, when you say, hey, this is pretty hoppy, that's enough of a recognizable statement to convey that idea to somebody that, hey, there's going to be some focus on the hops here instead of the malt or the alcohol or something like that.
I am curious if there's a big difference between pale ales and IPAs, India pale ales, or is it just kind of you throw a name on it and sometimes you include it?
So these days in American brewing, there frequently is not a huge difference between pale ales and IPAs. Pale ales should be more focused on flavor and aroma and not nearly as much on bitterness. There is a bitterness to them, but a good true to style pale ale shouldn't be super bitter just by its very nature. And an IPA is going to have more of a focus on that actual bitterness, that sensation on your tongue where you think, okay, yeah, that's bitter. The flavor's really lingering there and just kind of making me want to reach for a bowl of pretzels or something.
When I drink those and I taste that bitter, to me, it kind of just makes me think of like the hangover I'm going to have. Because usually like when I'm really hungover after drinking those next day, I like that bitter like goes from my mouth to like in my brain. I just get really hungover from IPAs. I don't know why.
I'm the same way, Jay. IPA is like murder. I really like them. I just have to like be like really cautious because they hit me pretty hard the next day.
And there's a manufacturing date on our can that's like just a little over a month old, which seems like it's an incredibly like young beer, which really matches the taste.
Yeah, that makes a huge difference. You definitely get a much fresher, brighter character from beers when they're consumed a little, as fresh as possible. But some people have taken it to the extreme, and they're now reaching past the stuff at the front to get the fresher stuff out of the back of the cooler. And it's from a distribution and retail standpoint, it's absolutely maddening when people turn their nose up at something that's been in a can for 60 days versus 6. But again, this is a personal favorite of mine, and usually the fresher the better on something that's hop focused like this.
For the Lord will protect me wherever I go, and I'll cross o'er Lake Michigan where the stormy winds blow.
And Jay, I don't know if you're getting the same vibe from all the stories you've read about this guy, but some people really defend him and say that he was well-meaning and did his best. Some people say he was crazy. So I go back and forth a lot.
He did some stuff. He was kind of like ahead of the times in some things, and then just completely just wrong about a lot of other things. Like, I guess he was really big on like conservation. I mean, he didn't want anybody to go like cut down the forest and go live in the forest. He's like, we're all here. We got plenty of stuff here, like in our town. There's just us live here. No one should just like want to go have a nice estate out in the woods to cut down trees and all that. Like, we got to conserve this land for future generations. So he was saying stuff like that. But then on the other hand, he was really against like some strange clothing options that he just was vehemently against. Narrow shoes. He even like one of his I don't know, like in the holy text that only he got from the angels or God. There's all, like, I read it. There's a bunch of paragraphs that just go on and on about narrow shoes, and he's just like, anybody that would want to wear narrow shoes, like, is just a disgusting person. Like, how dare you wear narrow shoes? Like, we're not doing that. I don't know why. He doesn't explain.
What about people with narrow feet?
It doesn't matter. Like in this book, it says he banned long dresses for women, decreed the use of bloomers or knee-length skirts, which once he started telling them how to dress, too, I don't think that's really what they signed up for. And he went great. He even tied people to whipping posts and abused people and like put businesses out of work just on like these weird little, not so much just like across the board, don't dress like sexy or anything. It was just like specific things that just drove him nuts that people wore.
Can I defend him on the bloomers?
Yeah.
No, I just researched this and it makes sense. I mean, everything that women had to wear in like basically up until like 1851 when bloomers were invented sounded like the worst possible thing you could ever wear. Several petticoats on top of each other, weighing up to like 15 pounds. So bloomers were invented so that so women could actually breathe. and it sounded like Strang was actually, there's some claims that he was a feminist. But here's a quick quiz, and drink on the honor system if you get it wrong. What are the other words for bloomers? 3 of these are correct. 1 is incorrect. Bloomers: pantaloons, freedom dress, Susan suits, or Turkish trousers.
Susan suits.
I think Turkish trousers.
Turkish trousers was synonymous with bloomers. That's what some people call them, Turkish trousers. Susan suits was incorrect.
I like Susan suits.
Yeah.
I wonder how many Susans there were on Beaver Island.
Not enough.
Well, I think now that we know the man a little bit more, I think we should try the next beer.
So up next, dank juice. I'll back up a little bit with some history on this one. There were a number of breweries out in New England that were producing what they called New England style IPAs that were super, super cloudy. When you poured them into a glass, kind of looked like orange juice sometimes, almost just really cloudy. And the funny thing is, at the time, that was considered a brewing defect or a flaw. And most brewers, if they accidentally produced something like that, would dump the entire batch and start over. But these breweries out in New England really embraced it and kind of leaned into it and perfected it and said, hey, you know what? We think this is kind of neat. We're going to stick with this for a while. And they quietly did their thing out in New England for a while. And as word of this style spread across the United States, more and more people thought, hey, that's pretty neat. So fast forward a little bit, Old Nation is a brewery out in Williamston. They decided, hey, we're going to try our hand at making this beer. And they made M43, which has turned into an absolute juggernaut in the Michigan beer sales scene. As you could expect, a number of other breweries thought, hey, you know what? We kind of want in on this cash cow that he's got a hold of. So everybody kind of started brewing their own version of it. Oddside created theirs, and they called it Dirty Dank Juice to start with. A couple of months ago, they rebranded a little bit, and they changed the name to the Original Dank Juice. And they use that as a base for all of the other variants. So Pink Guava Dank Juice is this beer plus some pink guava. Citra Dank Juice, Original Dank Juice with Citra hops. They have Mosaic, they have Simcoe, they have passion fruit, tangerine. There's a ton of different flavors, and they're all really, really cool in their own right. But what it comes down to is you've got a New England style IPA, and these throw a lot of sediment, and some people will recommend that you kind of roll the can around a little bit to dislodge that sediment to really give it that cloudy appearance and get the right effect. But it all ends up being the same sort of a cloudy IPA. You get a lot of really juicy hop flavors out of it. And I'm still not 100% certain I could put into real words what juicy means as far as a hop flavor is concerned, but it's one of those things that I can't really describe it, but I know it when I taste it, sort of a deal.
Kind of a mouthfeel.
Yeah.
So are most people in their branding, their hazy IPAs, that's basically New England style?
Yeah. Yep. And it kind of depends, because M43, if you pour it into a glass, does look like orange juice. There are some breweries that are making hazy IPAs and without billing it as a New England style that are not quite to the same degree that M43 is. So again, that's one of those neat things about American brewing culture, is that everybody's kind of got their own take on what it should be or what it could be. And you get varying degrees of hazy. I've had some breweries send us a hazy beer for us to sell that we poured into a glass. This isn't really all that hazy. I don't know what you guys are talking about, but I'll sell it. And then everything from there on to M43, which is almost chewy.
Is there a difference in like filtration or sending it through a centrifuge to pull the sediment out of a regular IPA?
Yeah, there's a few things. Part of it is that. Part of it's leaving it unfiltered. So something like Bean Flickr, which is going to be a little more on the clear side, or a nice Pilsner is going to be very, very clear. But part of it, there's a really weird like chemical transformation that I don't truly understand. If you dry hop a beer, that means you add hops to the beer after the fermentation is done, with hops that are dried out, as the name would imply. That gives it just a huge boost of aroma and doesn't impart any bitterness to the beer. But if you do that while the beer is still actively fermenting, there's some weird chemistry that goes on, and it precipitates out a lot of cloudy particulate that really just kind of remains suspended in the beer. And as a homebrew competition a year or two ago, I actually tried making a New England style, and it is not easy. It's so funny that people are trying so hard to make a beer these days that is truly not the way it's intended. And it all happened as kind of the result of an accident to begin with. And now people have to really work at it to recreate what the accident was in the first place.
Well, happy accident, as Ross would say.
What are all the flavors that people have?
We have pink guava.
Yeah, we got the.
As do I.
I went extra.
We have the original.
Yeah, we have the original dank juice.
What is the extra?
I think that actually is that green print on the can there? I think it says Citra.
Whoa.
The only reason why I know that is because I sell it, but it's It's
oh no
Citra.
way. Oh man.
But I have done that exact same thing. I've glanced at it and thought it said extra a number of times. It's a confusing script.
So this whole time,
Man, well, I poured a little bit of vodka in this. Now it's extra.
That would explain why I said it smells like orange juice.
Well, a light we did spy, that is Beaver Island, we are drawn nigh. We carried all sails.
So King Strang, at this point, Jay discussed, he made himself a king. Eventually, because of who we say, who was the president at that point?
Fillmore or something?
Millard.
No, Millard Fillmore.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
God, how could I forget?
One of the flyover presidents, as they call him.
old Millard. So he was arrested on multiple charges. King Strang was arrested on multiple charges, including treason and murder, amongst other things. He defended himself, as I stated earlier. He was a lawyer. Defended himself in court. Not only did he get off on all charges, they decided he went to Lansing, or no, he went to court in Detroit. they said, all right, man, you can be king if you want. So, but he didn't declare himself king of Beaver Island. He declared himself king of the kingdom of God. So he was the king of his religion, self-declared, and it was upheld by the court. So it's like the only legal coronation of a king in the history of the United States, and it happened on Beaver Island. But he was pushing his luck. He was treating his followers pretty terribly, and then because of his temperance movement and because Mormons didn't partake in alcohol, he banned the whiskey trade, kind of burning a lot of people in northern Michigan out of their full-time jobs. And so they revolted because of this whiskey ban. And then at the same time, because he was making all the women wear bloomers, they revolted. Those, for some reason, those were the two things that people just finally snapped after like 5 years of his reign on Beaver Island. They said, this guy's got to go. And two of his followers, shot him in the back, paralyzed him from the waist down. One bullet hit his spine. Took him about 6 weeks to die, but he passed away and just left his group of Strangites without a leader. And they just totally disbanded because he was shot in cold blood. Kind of a sad ending to his story.
He probably went out to Utah, but something interesting too was all those the people that had lived on the island before. A lot of them were like Irish immigrants and the fishermen and their families. They came back, and even though they hated this guy, it's kind of like we were talking about before, where it's like you kind of, it's ambiguous or ambivalent how you feel about them. They came back to like an island that was much more structured. That there's roads and there was everything was just like kind of better when they came back. So it wasn't like they came back, oh, that guy's gone. Oh no, look at our island. It's a disaster. They got to like come back. They got rid of the guy they didn't like. They came back and they're like, oh, and everything's organized and great.
Yeah.
And they're still there. The descendants of the people that kicked them out still live there, and they're very proud of it.
Yeah. And the two guys that shot him ended up getting immediately taken away to Mackinac Island to stand trial. They got $1.25 fine and left and were greeted by uproarious cheers. People just did not like this guy.
Is $1.25 back then though, like $50 today?
It may have been.
That seems kind of harsh. Thanks everybody, especially our beer expert. Man, let's give a round of applause. That was
well done, Jimbo.
Happy to help.
But yeah, so everybody, future episodes, just make sure you're following us on social media, which you obviously know what it is since that's how you'd see this. And we're gonna learn a lot about beer, learn a lot about Michigan. So cheers.
For we'll sleep in Lake Michigan, where the stormy winds blow.